Howdy, howdy, howdy. This is a switch. Certainly a switch for me. I'm nervous. It's a beautiful day outside. I'll try not to ruin it. I will try not to talk too fast. So far, so good. All right. So, we're going to hit the ground running. I'm going to do a lot of reading today. Oh, so much reading, because the book has a lot more to say than I do, thankfully, and that's not a bad thing. We're going to start off today in Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13, in verse 13. Now when Paul and his company loosed from Paphos, they came to Perga in Pamphylia, and John, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent unto them, saying, Ye men and brethren, if ye have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Go ahead and say it. So verse 16, Then Paul stood up, and beckoning with his hand, said, Men of Israel, and ye that fear God, give audience. The God of this people of Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt. And with an high arm brought he them out of it. And about the time of 40 years suffered he their manners in the wilderness, because they were pretty thankless, right? And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he divided their land to them by lot. And after that he gave unto them judges about the space of 450 years, until Samuel the prophet. And afterward they desired a king. And God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, by the space of 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony, and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. Of this man's seed hath God, according to his promise, raised unto Israel a Savior, Jesus. When John had first preached before his coming the baptism of repentance to all the people of Israel, and as John fulfilled his course, he said, Whom think ye that I am? I am not he. But behold, there cometh one after me, whose shoes of his feet I am not worthy to loose. Men and brethren, children of the stock of Abraham, and whosoever among you feareth God, to you is the word of this salvation sent. For they that dwell at Jerusalem, and their rulers, because they knew him not, nor yet the voices of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath day, they have fulfilled them in condemning him. And though they found no cause of death in him, yet desired they Pilate that he should be slain. And when they had fulfilled all that was written of him, they took him down from a tree and laid him in a sepulchre. But God raised him from the dead, and he was seen many days of them. Which came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are his witnesses unto the people. And we declare unto you glad tidings, how that the promise which was made unto the fathers, God hath fulfilled the same unto us their children, in that he has raised up Jesus again, as it is also written in the 2nd Psalm, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And as concerning that he raised him up from the dead, now no more to return to corruption, he said on this wise, I will give you the sure mercies of David. Wherefore he saith also in another psalm, Thou shalt not suffer thy Holy One to see corruption. For David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell on sleep, and was laid unto his fathers, and saw corruption. But he, whom God raised again, saw no corruption. Be it known unto you, therefore, men and brethren, that through this man is preached unto you the forgiveness of sins. And by him all that believe are justified from all things, from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. Beware, therefore, lest that come upon you which is spoken of in the prophets. Behold, ye despisers, and wonder, and perish. For I work a work in your days, a work which ye shall in no wise believe, though a man declare it unto you. And when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, the Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath. So, what am I going to talk about today? Nobody knows. From just reading that, it could be a whole lot of things. It could be a whole bunch of stuff, right? It could be God's promises, history, salvation, the resurrection, the Sabbath day. It's a very basic introduction to Jesus for both the Jews and the Gentiles. It's real 101, for sure. But what I want to talk about is David today. And I want to look at how heavily King David figures into this into this diatribe, into this basic diatribe, into this basic introduction to Jesus Christ. Verse 22, he's called a man after my own heart, which is a quote from God, so after God's own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. Verse 23, it's stated that through David's seed we will have Christ, the Messiah. Verse 34, it talks about the sure mercies of David. That's something I think we would all like, is that certainty of salvation. It's something that a lot of people struggle with even after baptism. Twice in this passage, David's prophetic psalms are quoted. You know, he's an extremely important guy, and he figures heavily into all different points of the Scripture. So getting started in the New Testament, you know, you have this air as you read through it that people all over they're waiting for the Messiah. They're expecting him to show up any time now, right? You've got the wise men that they talk about in Matthew 2, and they came from far away and all that. Well, how old was he at that time? They don't know, but you know, Herod thought it was such a broad thing that, you know, he killed all the children from 2 or 3 years old and under in a whole city. That's a big deal. That's a big period of time. That's something people would have heard about. And so then for these intervening, you know, 28 years or so, you know, he's tried to kill the Messiah, this future king, and it's the kind of thing that people would know about. They said they saw his star in the east. There was a guy in the temple, his name was Simeon, who was revealed through the Holy Spirit that he wouldn't die until he had seen the Messiah. That was in Luke 2. So there's this expectation for something to happen. So when people like John the Baptist rise up, you know, how many times was he asked, like, is it you? Is it you? You know, it wasn't him. He said it wasn't him. And other leaders that you read about in passing that would raise up a band and do something here or there, people would wonder, is that the Messiah? But it couldn't just be anyone, because time and time again it's stressed that Christ would be the Son of David. Now that's a pretty specific test that disqualifies a whole huge number of people from ever fulfilling that role. And that relationship there, that Son of David, is stressed, you know, throughout the Gospels. In the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel said to Joseph, "Joseph, you son of David." So many people who approached Christ asking for healing, you know, they would come up and they would be saying, "Have mercy on us, you son of David." Time and again, it was acknowledged as this special title, this important aspect of who he was. On the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, everybody shouted, you know, "Hosanna to the Son of David." There's a few times where Christ used examples from David's life to make a point, to teach. David's a pretty exceptional character. He has a very pivotal role in world history. His life, it's relatable because he's so human and he messes up, and I don't know, and the way that it's told, you know, not all the Bible is written in that manner, like a narrative, but the books about David, you can sit down and you can read them as if you were reading a novel, and you can learn from them, and you learn a bunch of history, you learn a whole bunch of stuff at the same time, and there's so many positive and negative examples from his life, and so that's what I'm going to do today. To understand who he is and why he's so unique, I'm going to talk about his background, and to do that, I'm going to go back probably farther than you would think to talk about the kind of world that he lived in. Some history, right? After Israel entered the Promised Land, the tribes of Israel entered the Promised Land following the Exodus. Joshua died, right? Everybody didn't do so hot. God started raising up judges to help protect the people. So that's where we're going to go. We're going to go here to Judges chapter 2. We're going to read the whole thing. We're going to read Judges chapter 2. "And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt, and have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this?" This is right after Joshua died, obviously. Joshua's life ends at the end of the book of Joshua. "Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their God shall be a snare unto you. And it came to pass, when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept, as well they should have. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. And when Joshua had let the people go," beg pardon, this is at the end of his life, "the children of Israel went every man unto his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnaheres in the mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gaash. And also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers. And there arose after another generation, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Baalim. So Joshua, his generation, the whole generation of youth that they raised, that had witnessed the miracles of God, that maybe were born, grew up in the wilderness, that crossed the Jordan River, they had these signs that they hung on to, and they had leadership and all that stuff, and they hung tight to the truth. But once that generation was gone, it was all over. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, verse 12, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. Sounds distressing, doesn't it? Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them, and turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. I hope that when we are vexed and oppressed and things like that, that the Lord takes ear with our groanings as well. Continuing in verse 19. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned, and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because that this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out from before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it, or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. And so this cycle that's mentioned here in this introduction, this early part of the book of Judges, it continues for a really long time, like the first part that we read in Acts. The people fall away and they do bad and they're all oppressed, and they say, oh no, please God help us, and God sends somebody, and they kind of straightens things up for a little while, but then, man, things are so good and everything's okay, and you can worship a few idols on the side, it's a big party, lots of fun, so they start going back into that. Oh no, they're oppressed again, because that's just the way it works. Maybe we live through some cycles like that too. It's hard to say. We don't really have the scope. So, moving right along. The cycle goes on and on. It goes on for hundreds of years. I'm obviously not going to read the whole book of Judges, since I really want to talk about David, and we're still really far away. But things got really, really bad at times, and to illustrate that, I'm going to go over to chapter 19 of the book of Judges, read a particularly nasty story here about the Levite and his concubine. And it came to pass in those days, chapter 19, verse 1 of the book of Judges, and it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. That's a servant wife. And his concubine played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And her husband arose and went after her, to speak friendly unto her, and to bring her again, having his servant with him, and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. I'm going to paraphrase some of this. So he stays with his father-in-law for a little while, and he wants to go. His father's like, oh, no, stay. Let's have a party. Let's eat and drink and be merry. And so they do that, and day after day, he holds him in the morning. Let's have breakfast. Oh, well, now you've been drinking. Well, now it's too late. Why don't you stay here one more night? Well, down in verse 10, he's tired of that. It's been a few days of that. It's getting late. He said, but the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and he's trying to go back home. He came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem, and there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine was also with him. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, And the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, and let us turn into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. Now, this is a point about the Israelites didn't drive anybody else out, really, so much. After the end of Joshua's life, they didn't really accomplish what they were supposed to. So it's, none of the Israelites controlled Jerusalem. It's still Jebus, the Jebusites, at this point in time. So his master says, verse 12, his master said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said unto his servant, Come, let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night in Gibeah or in Ramah. Because he doesn't want to stay with those guys that aren't Israelites, right? He wants to go to a good Israelitish city. Well, we'll see. Verse 14, And they passed on and went by their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And he went in, and he sat him down in the street of the city, for there was no man that took him into the house of his lodging. And behold, there came out an old man from his work out of the field at evening, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place, they were Benjamites. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And he said unto him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim. That's where I'm from. I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I'm now going to the house of the Lord, and there's no man that receives me into his house. And that was a thing. You could go out, and if you had, what you needed, people would let you stay with them. Sounds friendly. There's both straw and provender for our asses, and there's bread and wine, also for me, and for your handmaid, and for the young man which is with your servants. There's no want of anything. He's like, I got all my own stuff. I'm not going to eat all your food. Just let me sleep there. And the old man said, Peace be with you. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me. Only don't stay in the street. So he brought him into his house, and gave provender unto the asses. They washed their feet, did eat and drink. And as they were making merry, behold, men of the city, certain sons of Belial, some bad dudes out there, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came into your house, that we may know him. Now, this sounds a lot like Sodom and Gomorrah, doesn't it? But it's not. This is in Gibeah, a city of Benjamin in Israel. Now, this guy didn't want to stay at Jebus, but maybe he would have had better luck there in Jebus, because things were not going that great in Gibeah. They want to do more than meet you. Well, we won't go any farther into that, but the people of Gibeah, they shouldn't give health advice either. All right. That is funny. Oh, here we go. Where am I? I'm going to keep going. All right. There's one of these weird things ensues, kind of like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where he offers them something else. So the old man, the master of the house, verse 23, And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house, don't do this folly. Behold, there is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble you them, and do with them what seems good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. But the men would not hearken unto him. So the man brought his concubine, and brought her forth unto them. And they knew her, and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. They were done. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and fell down at the doors of the man's house, where her lord was, till it was light. And her lord rose up in the morning, and opened the doors of the house, and went out to go on his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And she was dead, D-E-D, dead. That was the end of that. So this is right in the middle of Israel, like we were talking about, right? And this was not good. This guy was pretty incensed by that. I don't think there was much defending it, and yet it was going on. It couldn't have been the first time that it happened. These guys just didn't form into a mob for once and, go on about their merry way here. So she's dead, and this guy is horribly offended, and I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter. It's pretty gruesome. He cuts her up, and he sends a piece of her to each of the 12 tribes, and he says, assemble here because something this awful shouldn't be done in Israel. So all the children of Israel, they all come together, and they talk about it, and they agree. They're like, yeah, this is terrible. So they go to the Benjamites, and they say, let's see, over here, 46. Nope, that's too far. All the tribes of Israel, let's see, chapter 20, verse 12. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, What wickedness is this that is done among you? Now, therefore, deliver us the men, the children of Belial, which are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death, and put away evil from Israel. So not everybody, not all the Israelites were into that. They weren't all okay with that, quite the opposite. But the children of Benjamin would not hearken to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. But the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together out of the cities unto Gibeah, to go out to battle against the children of Israel. And so that's kind of remarkable that the tribe of Benjamin, they stuck with their brothers, I guess, and they said, no, we're not going to give up these bad dudes to you. We'll fight you instead. That's kind of crazy. So there's a big battle, and obviously Israel vastly outnumbers the Benjamites. There's only about 26,000 Benjamites, and I think it says there's 400,000 Israelites there. And yet, for a few days, the Benjamites beat them. They just beat the crap out of them every single day. And yet the Lord tells them to go up again. Let's see, we're going to go up to number 46. They end up tricking them, right? So the third day, the Israelites assemble, and they got a bunch of guys waiting outside. And so they start to fight. Oh, no, some of them die, and they turn around and they run away. Like they're scared and they're retreating. And the Benjamites like, let's go get them. We're going to chase them down, even though there's way less of them. And they don't realize that there's all these guys lying in wait around. They come into the city, they set a big fire, they start killing everybody, and the Benjamites realize they've been wiped out. They're done. It said there were about 27,000 of them, and at least 25,000 of them were killed. Let's see. So them that which fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men that drew the sword. All these men were men of valor. I believe back in verse, let's see here, 15, it said there were about 26,000 of them plus 700 chosen left-handed men that used slings, which is interesting. It's an interesting side note, right? But 600 men, verse 47 of chapter 20 of the book of Judges, but 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness unto the rock of Rimmon, and abode in the rock of Rimmon 4 months. These are Benjamites. And the men of Israel turned again upon the children of Benjamin, and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well the men of every city, as the beast, and all that came to hand. All say they set on fire all the cities that they came to. So they were really abhorred by this whole thing, and all the stuff that's gone on. And there were not very many Benjamites left. There's very few of them. And this is the last chapter. This is leading up to the last chapter of the book of Judges. The very last chapter deals with how they preserved the tribe. They felt bad. They felt guilty about wiping out one of the entire tribes of Israel. They didn't want to do that, but they had agreed not to give any of their daughters for wives because they were such bad dudes or things like that. And so that's just to give you kind of condition that the land is in at that point in time. There's some horribly wicked stuff going on in certain places. It's generally not accepted, but it's not great. Things are kind of dicey and out of control. So moving on, the next book is the book of Ruth. Obviously, that's really important in the story of David, but I'm not going to read it. Don't worry. Ruth is David's great-grandmother. She was a Moabitess. She was from Moab. And, obviously it's a remarkable story. She was a kind and gracious woman who stuck with her mother-in-law because she had been all alone, and that's the kind of character that God likes. They preserved them, and, she's in the lineage of Jesus Christ. It's interesting. It's a great story. Still not going to read it. We're going to move on to Samuel here. Now, Samuel is the last judge, and he's also the first prophet. So that's cool. Let's see. Samuel was the son of a woman named Hannah. She was barren, and her husband had another wife who had a bunch of kids. She gave her a real hard time about it. She was really sad, and so she prayed. She prayed to God that she would have a child, son, anything like that. She was given a son, and part of that deal was she had made a vow that if she could have a son, that she would dedicate, she would lend him to the Lord, I think is the language that's used. Like he would be dedicated to the Lord his whole life. And she was given that son, and that son was Samuel. And I'm going to read her speech here. It's chapter 2, 1 Samuel chapter 2, because it's awesome. It's a really good speech. And Hannah prayed and said, My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so exceeding proudly. Let not arrogancy come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. They that were full full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry ceased, so that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave, and he brings up again. Resurrection there. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises up the poor out of the dust, and lifts up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he hath set the world upon them. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. That's a pretty awesome speech that shows that this lady was a righteous woman. She knew a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to move on. That's Samuel. That's where he comes from. Obviously, he was raised pretty well. Once he was weaned, which was probably at a more elevated age than we tend to wean our children at these days. Some of us, anyway. He was given to the priests. To Eli, particularly, was in charge of the ark in Shiloh at that point in time, and he was there, and that's where he worked. So in 1 Samuel, chapter 2. Let's see. Was I just going to keep going? All right. So back in chapter 2, verse 11. And Elkanah, that's her husband, went to Ramah to his house, and the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli the priest. The child is Samuel. Verse 12, chapter 2. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They're bad dudes too. Oh no. They knew not the Lord. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came, while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand, and he stuck it into the pan, or kettle, or cauldron, or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Now the sacrifices, the people got to eat a lot of that. There were some that were burned completely up, but a lot of people, when they brought sacrifices, that was for them and their family, their friends, all that too at the same time. But the priests also received their portion out of that. Verse 15. Also before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. Now this wasn't right. And if any man said unto him, Let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth. Then he would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. That's rather trifling to do with God's offerings. Verse 17, Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for the men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat, and brought it to him from year to year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife, and said, The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went unto their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived, and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that served at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. And the child Samuel grew on and was in favor, both with the Lord and also with men. Let's see. Also with men. Here we go, verse 27. And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, and to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me? He put his own kids above what his responsibility to God, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me. For them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thy house. And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, and in all the wealth which God shall give Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. And the man of thine, whom I shall not cut off from mine altar, shall be to consume your eyes and to grieve your heart. And all the increase of your house shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be a sign unto you, that shall come upon your 2 sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die, both of them. And I will raise me up a faithful priest, that shall do according to that which is in my heart and my mind, and will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. And it shall come to pass, that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I might eat a piece of bread. So God didn't take too kindly to not only to the sins of his sons, but to Eli's lenience with it either. All the stuff that God promised would happen, that did happen. That's described in the following chapters here. They're going to war against the Philistines, and Hophni and Phinehas take the ark out. They get killed. The ark is stolen. Eli hears about it. He falls off where he's sitting. He breaks his neck. He dies. His daughter-in-law has a miscarriage, and they name the child Ichabod, tragedy of tragedies. But that really sets the stage for Samuel here to grow up in a position of importance. And he grew into a righteous judge, and he was the leader of the people for all of his life. We're going to turn over to Samuel chapter 7 and continue in verse 15. 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 15. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. And his return was to Ramah, for there was his house, and there he judged Israel, and there he built an altar unto the Lord. Chapter 8. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. And they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. A lot like Eli. Verse 4, Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, you're old, and your sons walk not in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So this is why I've read so much to get here, more than I anticipated to get here, was that this is how we get to the part where the people demand a king, right? But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. This is verse 6. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. Verse 7, And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of a king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told all the people the words of the Lord that asked of him a king. And he said, This will be the manner of a king that shall reign over you. He'll take your sons, appoint them for himself, his chariots, to be his horsemen. Some shall run before his chariots. He'll appoint him captains over thousands and 50s, set them to ear his ground and to reap his harvest, to make instruments of war and chariots. He'll take your daughters to be cooks and servants and bakers. He'll take your fields, your vineyards, your olive oil, the best of them, and give them to his servants, the people that serve him, and do what he wants them to. He'll take the tenth of your seed, of your vineyards, and give to his officers and his servants. 16, and he will take your men servants, your maid servants, and your goodliest young men. He'll take your asses too, and he'll put them to his work. And he'll take the tenth of your sheep, and you'll be his servants. And you shall cry out in that day because of your king which you have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we'll have a king over us. That's kind of depressing. You know, you go through all this, no, but this, and that's going to be bad. Like, don't do that. And they're like, we want to do it anyway. All right. Oh, well. Because they want to be like all the other nations, verse 20, and have a king that can judge this, that can go out before us to fight our battles. Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man into your city. Let's see, we're just going to do the first couple of this next chapter. Chapter 9, Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, and goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. Wow, that's really impressive. Big, super duper tall dude. It's good that he can lead you because everybody can see him from wherever they are. So it's obvious that he should be in front, right? Moving right over to verse number 21 there. Saul, although we know how Saul turned out, verse 21, 1 Samuel 9:21, Saul answered and said, "Am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Where therefore speakest thou unto me?" So Saul, he wasn't, even though he was this big fancy guy, and it says his dad was a mighty man of valor, they were probably pretty important, he recognizes that, well, first of all, he's from Benjamin. We just read about Benjamin at the end of the book of Judges. They got wiped out. They were pretty much gone. There weren't very many of them left, and so they were the puniest of all the tribes, probably at this point in time. He didn't think overly highly of himself or who he was or anything like that. That's not a bad thing. He was humble in that manner, at least. So in chapter 10, let's see. In chapter 10, Samuel's going to try to encourage Saul. He tells him all these things that are going to happen to him. Somebody's going to give him some bread. The Spirit's going to fall on him. He's going to prophesy. And, they had the saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" which is funny. I like to use that for jokes sometimes. And so it's not, he tells him all this stuff in detail that's going to happen to him that shortly comes to pass, and it's to encourage him because he's humble, but maybe he's a little overly humble right there. He's supposed to be the king. He's been promised. Samuel takes him out. He anoints him. He tells him the donkeys are fine, that he was gone and he was looking for. And he tells him all this stuff he's going to happen to him. And it comes to pass. You'd think you'd be encouraged, like God has chosen you. Rise to the occasion at this point in time. But he wasn't. He was scared. So here we go. In 1 Samuel 10, verses 7 and 8, "Let it be when these signs come unto you that you do as occasion serves you, for God is with you. And you shall go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come down unto you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shall you tarry till I come unto you to show you what to do." Here we go. And moving over to verse 17 through 27. So he sends him back home for a while. He tells him he's going to tarry. All this other stuff already happened to him. And then he goes ahead and he calls all the people together. This is 1 Samuel 10, verse 17. Samuel called all the people together. See, I told you. "Unto the Lord to Mizpah. And he said unto the children of Israel, Thus says the Lord, I brought you up out of Egypt and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all kingdoms that oppressed you. You have this day rejected God, who himself saved you out of all these tribulations, and said, No, we'll have a king over us instead. Therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands." And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. So it's like a by lot thing. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they sought him, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, Behold, he has hidden himself among the stuff. And they ran and got him, and fetched him from hence, from under the sleeping bag where he lay, I suppose. And he was higher than any of the people from his shoulders and upwards. And Samuel said to all the people, See him who the Lord has chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people of the way, every man to his house. And Saul also went home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and brought him no presents. But he held his peace. He didn't make an issue out of it. He had only just been anointed, right? Saul went home to Gibeah. I think that's funny. He went home. He's from the city where those rotten sodomites lived, where they assembled, and the whole other stuff that we read at the end of the book of Judges took place. That's just an interesting side note there. So we know that Saul didn't work out in the end, right? It didn't go all that well for him. And part of that was his own character, and the difference between Saul and David's character, which is part of why I've read all this stuff, maybe it's been a little bit too long, is pretty stark. What does God want other than faith and obedience? When Saul's anointed, he's told that all these things they're going to happen to him. Everything comes to pass. Does he have any confidence in God's promise? No, he runs and hides. When it's time for him to get up and do what he's been told he has to do, so he goes, he runs and hides. He doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He doesn't trust God, and what does God really want from any of us more than faith and obedience? We're going to turn over to 1 Samuel 12, verse 16. All right. Here we are. Now Samuel is addressing the people. Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. So Saul's been king for a little while, and he's gone out and he's fought some. Everybody's pretty much okay with him. They're feeling really good about themselves. They had a big party to celebrate how great it's going. Samuel says, no, you don't forget that God didn't want this, that you've rejected him. And he reminds them of the wicked thing they've done. So Samuel called unto the Lord, verse 18, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. I guess it was rain entirely out of due season. It says it was the day of the harvest. It probably messed up all their stuff. And the people said unto Samuel, pray for thy servants, and unto the Lord thy God, that we die not. For we have added unto all of our sins this evil to ask us a king. And Samuel said unto the people, fear not, you've not done all this wickedness. You've done all this wickedness, yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart, and turn you not aside, for then ye should go after vain things, which cannot profit nor deliver, for they are vain. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it hath pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you. But I will teach you the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart. For consider how great things he hath done for you. But if you shall still do wickedly, ye shall be consumed, both you and your king. So, this is it's a very almost New Testament message right there. It's like God's not asking a whole lot. Obey, be obedient, be faithful, and, keep yourself out of trouble. However, it isn't long before Saul messes up. He gets a little pretentious, and he offers some sacrifices himself here in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 13. Samuel said unto Saul, you have done foolishly. He was waiting for Samuel to show up. Samuel took a long time. To comfort the people, he went ahead and he performed some sacrifices. It wasn't his place to do those things. He knew that. He knew better. So when Samuel does show up, he says, verse 13, you've done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now would the Lord have established your kingdom upon Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be captain over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. So really early on, after Saul becomes king, he's told, sorry, buddy, you're the last of your line. It's not going to go much farther after you, because you are messing up already. You know what I mean? It's a little bit tragic when you consider what a long reign he had ahead of him. I think he reigned for 40 years total. He had plenty of other foibles. Maybe you remember the story of his son, Jonathan, who he attempted to put to death at one point in time. He had called a fast, but Jonathan wasn't around. He was actually off with his servant, and he had taken a stronghold and done all this great stuff. He hadn't heard that it was a fast, and he was walking later on. He ate some honey, and at any rate, it was a big problem. Saul tried to kill him. The people stopped him. Then, of course, there's the thing with the Amalekite king Agag, when God told him, go and destroy everybody, all the livestock, everything like that. And he doesn't do it. He listens to the people, and he keeps Agag alive, brings him back. They bring back all the best cows and sheep and everything like that. Because what? They're going to sacrifice them. Yeah, they're going to have a big party. They're going to eat that stuff too, right? And he keeps Agag alive. He does exactly what he's been told not to do, but he thinks he's done a great thing. Well, it doesn't really work out. It's not the kind of king that God wanted. It's the kind of king that God told the people they would have. Of course, he wasn't the only king that oppressed the people and taxed them. Even Solomon, by the end of his life, was very oppressive on all the people. But he did have a king in mind. He did have a man after his own heart that he had decided upon. And in 1 Samuel 16, we meet David, the youngest son of Jesse, like I said, the great-grandson of Ruth. And he's a pretty good dude. He's altogether different from Saul. So we're going to read that chapter there. Let's see. Not going to read the whole thing. In chapter 16, God tells Samuel, you can get up and go over here. I've picked me a king. He's among the sons of Jesse. It's not the big, strong ones. It's not any of the other nice ones. Jesse's got plenty of nice sons. It's none of those guys. And he says, is this it? Aren't there any more? And we only got one more. He's a little guy. He's out there. He's with the sheep. So chapter 16, verse 12. And he was sent. So they sent and get him from the sheep. And he was sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look at. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit troubled him. I'm going to pause right there before verse 14. Not only was he the youngest one, it's a big gathering. Everybody knows what's going on. He takes him. He's right in the middle of all his brethren, and he anoints them. He anoints David to be king over all Israel. He's just a little guy, right? He's just a little guy with a bunch of big, strong brothers. What do you think that does in his family structure? Does it cause any jealousy, any problems like that? But David's not a bad guy. What do you think it does for him personally? Now, if he has faith and he believes God that he's going to grow up and to be king over Israel, well, suddenly his life has a great purpose, and there's a lot that he's probably willing to embark upon that a normal youth without a promise like that wouldn't be willing to do. It might help to explain his bravery. We're going to keep reading here, and we'll talk about his bravery and stuff a little bit in a minute. Verse 14 of 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, behold now, an evil spirit from God troubles you. Let our Lord now command your servants which are before you to seek out a man who's a cunning player on a harp, and it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and you shall be well. And Saul said unto his servants, provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in manners, and he's good looking too, he's comely, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, a bottle of wine, a kid, sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him. And he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Now, I don't know exactly how old David was when all this stuff happened, but he couldn't have been very old. This is obviously prior. The next chapter deals with Goliath and all that stuff. But already, David has a reputation as being a mighty valiant man, a man of war, prudent in manners, he's good looking and all that. Now, I know there's some big, beefy, strong 14-year-olds out there and stuff like that are more of a man of war than I will ever be. So maybe David was one of those guys. Maybe the anointing and the knowing that he had a special purpose in life, maybe it drove him to be a much, much better and stronger, person than he would have been otherwise. Because a king in those days was a bona fide leader, like a real guy out in front, getting messy and things like that, not commanding from the back in any sense of the thing. So, moving right along here, some time must passes here, because we have David going with Saul in chapter 16. Then chapter 17, Saul goes off to war against the Philistines. David's not there, obviously, so Goliath shows up, and here we encounter David again. His father is sending him because David's older brothers are off with the army. David's still not even old enough to be part of any of that, but David gets sent to check on them, and he brings them some bread, and when he gets there, some exciting things are happening. This giant is out there. So we're going to read chapter 17, verse 23. David has just gotten there. He left a carriage with somebody. Verse 23, and as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel he is come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. That's an interesting statement, too. Actually, both of those things, that he would give him his daughter, and that he would make his father's house free. Because if you marry the princess, what are you, if not a prince, right? And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that kills him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest you down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the naughtiness of your heart, for you are come that you might see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. It's possible that David, with a sense of his purpose, saw this opportunity, saw all the armies of Israel fleeing before this giant. Here they are, humiliated, and nobody will stand up. And knowing what he has in front of him, he's willing to be the guy. Not only that, if he does, he gets to marry the princess, and then he's a prince. And so if he's going to be king, later on in the story, that his marriage to Saul's daughter legitimizes his ascension to the throne in later times. But obviously, you don't know that right now, unless you've read the book. I don't know. Let's see. David spoke before Saul, verse 32, and David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, You can't go against him. You're just a youth. And he was a man of war from his youth. He's no taller than Dr. Fauci, maybe. I don't know. That's not funny. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, not at the same time probably. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and I smote him, and I slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing as he hath defied the armies of the living God. So David was willing to hazard his life, maybe with that sense of purpose, that sense of responsibility over what he was supposed to be taking care of. But smiting a lion or a bear, that's some scary stuff. That's some pretty brave stuff, especially for a little young dude. Let's see. When this concludes, I'm not going to read the part about killing Goliath. That's fairly familiar. Verse 55 of chapter 17, verse 55, it's right as he's going out. Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine. He said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand, a grisly present, not the last one he'd give Saul either. And Saul said unto him, Whose son are you, you young man? So even though David had previously been in his service, if he was much younger before, even though in his younger state he was already regarded as wise and a mighty man of war and all this stuff, he'd grown up enough that Saul didn't even recognize him right there face to face. So David answers and says, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. That's interesting. And so Saul keeps him. He doesn't recognize him. Well, he likes him after that. He's won this great victory. He's a champion of sorts, obviously. He doesn't let him go home anymore. Before that, he'd been with Saul. It's time to go to war. He said, Kid, go home. Let's see, chapter 18. Oh, boy, I can't read all that. Let's see, but it's pretty important. I'm going to go through chapter 18 pretty quickly here. Jonathan, at the beginning of it, is very happy. He's, it says his soul is knit with that of David. He's very pleased. Saul won't let David go home anymore. David and Jonathan make a covenant together, which is great. That they were good friends. That ends up saving David's life later on. And chapter 18, down in verse 5, it says, And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, because he gave him lots of responsibility, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? Well, maybe he remembered that the kingdom wasn't going to go past him any farther in his own line. Maybe he, by making all these promises about the Philistine, he had sowed the seeds of his own destruction there. So David is very successful. And Saul tries different things to get rid of him by sending him into battle, by making him bring him 100 foreskins of the Philistines for the dowry for his daughter, which he thinks, let the hands of the Philistines be against him. He thinks he's going to require this great feat of war from him, and in doing so, it's actually going to kill him. It's going to end his life, and he'll be rid of him. He's jealous. He's probably scared. He knows he knows for himself that it's not going to go on. This gets so bad, David behaves himself so wisely and has so much esteem and admiration that Saul is he's going to have somebody kill him. And eventually, David has to flee. He's got to get out of there. These next chapters, 19, 20, and 21, they deal with David fleeing. He's running away from Saul all the time. People are pursuing him all through his life. So we're going to read chapter 22, 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1. David therefore departed thence and escaped the cave Adullam, and when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to meet him. And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. So David kind of became this hero-ish figure. He was already a champion for the people. He was going around defending them in spite of being persecuted and chased by Saul at times. These people gather himself to him. He's got his own small army, but he's worried for his family. He gets them to stay with the king of Moab, which, Ruth was from Moab, a Moabitess. That was his parents' grandmother, so there was some connection there. It's not just some random guy completely out of the blue. He said, keep my parents for me, will you? So all these people gather themselves to him. It says there were 400 already in that verse. Later on, by verse 13 of the same chapter, it says 600. So it's like constantly people are coming to him for protection, to get out away. Obviously, the things that Saul is doing are quite wrong, that David's being persecuted without good purpose. He barely is saved. We're going to read here in 1 Samuel 23, verse 25. Saul has been chasing him all around with his group of men. Verse 25, Saul and his men went to seek him. They told David. So people came and told David, Saul's here looking for you with all his dudes. And Saul obviously has a much bigger army than David's 600 guy. He's got, I think it says 3,000. Wherefore he came down into a rock and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain. So it was real close. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, Haste thee, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore they called the name of that place, Selah Hamalekoth. There we go. Selah Hamalekoth, got it. Verse 29, And David went up from thence and dwelt in the strongholds at En-Gedi. Carrying on, chapter 24, It came to pass when Saul was returned from following the Philistines that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way, and there was a cave. And Saul went in to cover his feet, that means to use the bathroom. And David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day which the Lord has said unto you, Behold, I will deliver your enemies into your hand, that thou may doest to him as it seems good unto you. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily, secretly. He snatched off a little piece of his robe in there. I mean, here he is. They're hiding in a cave. Saul's looking everywhere for him. Saul's like, okay, let's take a break. I got to go to the bathroom. And he goes into the very cave where David and his men are hiding and, almost loses his life. It came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him. This is chapter 24, verse 5, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. David respected that. David had God's promise that he would be king. He didn't need to seize it for himself. He was willing to wait and let it take place naturally. He believed God that it was his will, therefore it would happen. So not only was he protected, but he wasn't going to force the issue himself. Verse 7, So David stayed his servants with these words. He didn't let them. His servants were going to go ahead and kill Saul too, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. He humbled himself. And David said unto Saul, Wherefore do you hear men's words, saying, Behold, David seeks your hurt? This day your eyes have seen how that the Lord delivered you into my hand in the cave. And some bade me to kill you, but my eye spared you. And I said, I will not put forth mine hand against the Lord, my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, he acknowledges their relationship, their deeply personal relationship. See the skirt of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of your robe, and I killed you not. Now, that's some pretty good proof that he could have got him, and he didn't. He let him go scot-free, as they say. And killed thee not. Know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my soul to take it. The Lord judge between me and you, and the Lord avenge me of you. But my hand shall not be upon you. As saith the proverb of the ancients, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be upon you. After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea. The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see and plead my cause, and deliver me out of your hand. And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He wasn't a totally rotten guy, I guess. In his heart, he still had some compassion. And he said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded you evil. And you have showed this day how that you have dealt well with me, forasmuch as when the Lord had delivered me into your hand, you killed me not. For if a man find his enemy, and will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good, for that thou hast done unto me this day. And now, behold, I know well that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear now, therefore, unto me by the Lord, that you will not cut off my seed after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David sware unto Saul, and Saul went home. But David and his men got them up unto the hold. They went back into hiding. And as you know, the story goes on. It doesn't last forever. This truce, this epiphany, I guess, that Saul has, that doesn't last. David continues protecting the people, protecting them from their enemies, going out before them and all that stuff, and still Saul remains jealous. But look at the difference between the two characters and the difference that it reveals, particularly this story. Would David have been justified? I mean, Saul had tried to kill him time and time again, openly, and told other people, and thrown a javelin at him, so on and so forth. Yet David wouldn't raise his hand against him. And the kind of character that reveals, that's pretty intense, especially in a time like this where you could have easily done it and justified it. You know, he's been anointed to be king. Saul is messed up all over the place. He's wrapped up in this evil crusade against David, who has done nothing but lead the people and to be a champion for them. It shows what a man after God's own heart is. Really, all of David's life is an example of that, and it took me some getting there, but that really was the point in the end. He was faithful. He believed God that his promises would come to pass, and he didn't need to force it with his own hand. He was valiant. He risked his own life for the people, even to do the job that he was supposed to do, to save the sheep from the beasts that came to attack them. He was merciful. He let Saul go clean away. He forgave him. He didn't seek vengeance upon him, and that's the kind of person that God is looking for, and that's why over here in Ezekiel chapter 37, starting in verse 21, Ezekiel 37:21, and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. And one king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more. Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places, wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God. And David my servant shall be king over them, and they shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments, and observe my statutes, and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, even they and their children's children and their children's children forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. That's quite a character. There's obviously a lot more to the story than I read, though I read way more than I should have and went on far too long also. So we'll end it with that, with a great example of the kind of character that God's looking for. Thank you.